Hello and welcome to another video here at Hobbies and Happiness. My name's Dan.
I'm Jim, and today we're going over 10 terms every card game player should know.
All right, so today we wanted to make a short video just going over 10 terms that we think every card game player should know. And if you're new to card games, hopefully this will kind of give you a good primer on some terms that you're going to hear a lot and that you might not know right away. But we're going to kind of give you a little bit of insight onto what each one of these are. The first one we're going to talk about is tap. All that means is turning a card upwards and then rotating it 90 degrees. That's all it is. Yeah. So tap originated from the game Magic the Gathering, and kind of other games have used the same function or utility, but have called it other things. You got Duel in Final Fantasy. The other one you hear the most is Exhaust. Yep. It's all the same thing. You're rotating the card 90 degrees, and that usually indicates that you've used it as a resource or you've done a thing with it. Yep. So like I said, the one you hear most often other than tap is Exhaust. Yep. So that's all tap means.
Next up, we have card advantage. So when you're thinking about the game, right, you both start with 5 cards in your hand.
Depending on what game we're talking about.
Depending on what game it is.
Yeah, you could start with 10.
You could start with 10. Who knows? So you both start with 5 cards in your hand. And if you were to play a card that had you draw 2 cards, well, now you have 6 total cards in comparison to your opponent's 5 total cards. And then there's a same thing with also paying attention to the board state. If one of your creatures kills your opponent's creature, well, now you have 1 more card than they do as a whole. So, card advantage.
Yeah, it's basically like who has more cards. And it's not just in hand, like Jim just said.
Yeah.
Like, it does kind of pay attention to your board state.
Yep.
And so that's why anytime you see a card that says draw card, like it's a cantrip, that's a form of card advantage, okay?
Yeah.
That's
it's also deck thinning, which is card advantage.
Yeah, sure. Also, like if you have a card that has your opponent discard a card, like that could also be a form of card advantage. However, like one thing to keep in mind though, like if you play a card, there's a card like Duress or Inquisition of Kozilek, okay? Where you are playing a card from your hand and your opponent is discarding a card from their hand, there is no card advantage because it's a 1-for-1 type of effect.
But you're spending a card to get rid of a card that could really hinder you in the future. So it's not exactly card advantage, but being able to take something out of their hand that's going to mess with you later is huge.
It absolutely is, and I'm definitely not taking away from that. It's just the term card advantage specifically means how many cards you have, your opponent has, and vice versa. Essentially, that's it. All right, the next term we're talking about is ramp. I remember when I first got into card games, okay, I was watching somebody stream The Elder Scrolls Legends, okay, and they said this term ramp, and I'm like, what is this? What does that mean? All it means is you're accelerating your number of resources you're generating, okay? So in most card games, okay, you get on turn 1, you have the option to you have 1 resource at your disposal. Turn 2, you have another resource. You now have 2 total. On turn 3, and so on and so forth, okay? Digital card games, it's a whole lot easier to manage because it's very easy to say, or have a program that says, on this turn you get 1, this turn you get 1, and so on and so forth.
Start of every turn.
All ramp is you are accelerating that. So if I play a card on turn 3 where it puts a land onto my field, for instance, on the next turn, I now have 1 additional resource at my disposal.
Next up, we have curve. So in terms of Magic, right, every single one of your cards has a mana amount, right? A mana value, I guess we could say.
Cost,
converted mana cost. I just wanted to get both of their names out there.
Get them in there.
And so you could have 0 drops, you could have 1 drops, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And most of your cards that you want to be playing in the deck most of the time are low cost, so that way you have a higher percentage of being able to play those cards on your first turns. Because if you think about it, how long does it really take for you to be able to play a card that costs 7 mana?
7 turns.
On average,
you would assume.
if you're looking at you're only dropping 1 land per turn without having any form of ramp, it's going to take you those whole 7 turns to be able to get there.
Right.
So you don't want to be having so much of the cards in your deck for your mana curve. That's one of the things it's for.
One other thing too is because like the curve kind of means that it can mean a few different things,
Yes.
right? And so you could look at the curve in a form of deck building, okay?
Yep.
So if you look at your deck, if you're building a 40 card deck, for instance, okay, you would have all of your 1-cost creatures or your 1-cost cards in this column, 2 cost here, 3, and so on and so forth. And that curve would be, if you look at the number 1, here's how many at the 1 slot I have, here's how many at the 2 slot, 3 slot, 4 slot, and then that generates a curve.
Starts to make a curve on a graph.
Right, yeah, right.
But then you also have what Dan was just about to talk about, curving out. So it's turn 1, you play a 1-drop. Turn 2, you play a 2-drop. Turn 3, you play a 3-drop, so on and so forth. And you curve out, utilizing as much mana as you can for each and every single one of your turns.
Yeah, you're using all of your available resources on that turn.
Yep.
All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is the X drop. Like Jim was just talking about, like your 1-drops, your 2-drops. Okay, yeah, right? Right. All that means is it's looking at the cost of your card. Typically, when you're saying a 1-drop or a 2-drop, you're referencing a creature card, again, in Magic, typically, okay? Because you have your spells that they do cost a certain amount, but typically we don't refer to spells as that drop, okay? Typically, like at least for me, I typically don't, but you can, because
I think it's normally if someone asks, "Oh, what's the CMC or what's the cost of it?" I'll be like, "Oh, it's a 2-drop."
Okay, yeah.
So you still can because you're dropping the card.
Correct.
It's just not there for very long.
Yeah. So all it is the cost of that card, right? So if the card costs 1, well, you'd refer to it as a 1-drop. If it costs 2, you'd refer to it as a 2-drop. Because again, like if you've never heard that term before, like, drop? What are you talking about? It's all it is. It's the cost of that card. That's really all it is.
Yeah, exactly. Next up, we got body. In other games, it tends to mean that you completely destroyed your opponent and you bodied them.
Yeah, that's true.
But that's not what it is in Magic.
Yeah.
Or other card games.
And really any card
general.
game. Yeah, right.
It's paying more attention to the toughness or like the HP of your target.
Yeah.
Or of your card that you have.
Yeah.
So if something has a 1 toughness or 1 HP, it's a pretty small body. It's the smallest body that you can put out there. But if you throw something out there that's 8, a 9, a 10, that is a thick boy right there. Okay. That is a big body right there.
And so like in other games, like again, Final Fantasy comes to mind where there's 1 number, because with Magic, you've got 2 numbers. You got your power and your toughness. Typically when we're talking about the body, we're looking at that toughness value, right? But with Final Fantasy, where that 1 number encompasses, it's the same number. It's your offense and your defensive value, right? But when we say body, it's basically how much damage it can take is essentially what we're talking about when we say body.
Yeah, and you could also throw in the damage aspect of it as well, because it's just looking at the card as kind of like a whole. It's like, how big of a card is this? And you could even throw in like the converted mana cost or the mana value of the card. If it's like a 12-drop, it's like, that's going to be a big card.
Yeah, right.
Huge card,
right,
most of the time.
Yeah, but typically we're looking at how much damage that card can take when we're talking about the body of a card.
Yep.
All right, the next one we're going to talk about is token. So you've probably heard the term token thrown around so many times, okay? Especially in
wasn't that Lord of the Rings?
Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, token.
I see what you did there.
Dale wasn't ready for that.
I was literally not ready for that. So you're Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, not the same thing.
Okay.
But anyway, what token means is essentially is a card that's brought in by another card, essentially. Like it is a card that's generated by another card, okay? So a good a good example here is the card Tireless Tracker. Tireless Tracker from Magic the Gathering has landfall, essentially, where when a land enters the battlefield under your control, you create you investigate. And in order to investigate, you create a clue token, okay? And many games, like Magic, you can get the actual token cards, okay? But it's basically all it is. And there's a lot of cards that also generate creature bodies, so like a 1/1 token, okay? It basically what token means is it's just a generated card from another card.
Next up, we have the 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 or in general X for 1. Really all that means is how many cards are you able to take care of on your opponent's board for just one of your cards. So a 2-for-1 would be like, oh, I have a card that is a board wipe, but he only has 2 cards out on field. All right, let's go ahead and, now that I'm thinking about it, we could have board wipe on here too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Board wipe is exactly that. We just wipe the board clean. There's no more monsters on it. So if he has 2 monsters out on the field and I play 1 card, I am now getting a little bit more card advantage because I have taken care of 2 of his cards for 1 of mine.
My favorite time to play a board wipe is when I have no creatures on the field.
Oh, it's the best time.
It's the best thing ever. Is to have no creatures. My opponent has 5 creatures on the field. Board wipe 5-for-1.
5-for-1? That feels good.
Feels good. And a lot of times, I feel like in a lot of these conversations, when you say like it's a 2-for-1, you're talking about like attacking your opponent's hand, for instance, and you're looking at their cards in their hand, right? Or it's I play 1 card, my opponent discards 2 cards. Okay, that's a 2-for-1, right? But these terms like 2-for-1, 3-for-1. There's many different scenarios when it could be applicable. It's how many cards, but again, at the end of the day, it's looking at how many cards I am utilizing and then how many cards am I taking care of from my opponent. So this is one of actually my favorite terms in all of card games is the X for 1.
And it's also a very feels bad moment when you have to use 2 of your cards to take out 1 of your opponent's cards.
Absolutely.
You pretty much always want to go minimum 1-for-1. You never want to get 2-for-1 on yourself taking out 1 of your opponent's cards.
Here's a situation where you want to be careful, right? You play a card, okay? You cast a card that is trying to look at your opponent's hand or whatever, and then your opponent counters it. Okay, if your opponent counters it and you have a counter spell available to you, okay, that's when you're like, you want to be careful. Like, do you really want to spend that other card from your hand? Okay?
Well,
it depends. Like again, it depends because you're spending more cards from your hand.
Specific scenario. Okay. If you play 1 card that takes 1 card out of your opponent's hand, right? You could instantly see it being like, okay, I got rid of that counter spell from their hand, and they had to pay mana for it. But the other thing is, they paid mana to protect what's in their hand. I'm counterspelling their card.
Correct.
They don't want it gone.
Correct. Yes.
That's the mind games now.
That's true. No, that's true. That is absolutely true. It's just you're thinking about it in terms of like card advantage is another thing too, right? There's so many things that go into kind of what these decisions that you're making in game. Probably one of the biggest terms in all of card gaming is the metagame. When I first got into card games, now this term does not specifically apply to card games, okay? This term has actually been used in a lot of strategy games mostly. However, it applies to everything. Literally everything, okay?
Everything.
And now, here's an explanation you've probably heard when you were looking up the term, what does metagame mean? The game within the game. When I first heard that term, I was even more confused.
Now I'm gonna go type up, what does that mean?
However, once I came to my understanding of what the metagame is, the game within the game made a whole lot more sense. Okay, so what metagame essentially means is I was gonna say the game within the game, right? But it's what game you are playing.
Yeah.
Okay. The good way to think about this is in the game of Magic. The game of Magic is played. Let's just look at the United States, for example. Okay. It is played in many places within the United States. However, I go to my local game store and play the game of Magic, and I specifically play the game of Modern. Okay.
Yeah.
I know that there's normally 10 different players who play the game of Modern. And I know each and every deck that those 10 players are going to bring on any given FNM, Friday Night Magic. Yeah. That is the metagame. I know what decks they are playing, okay? It's who is playing what deck, okay? What is being played in this specific scenario or situation, okay? That is exactly what the metagame is basically what's being played.
Yep. Exactly.
And so that's why I really do like that term of the game within the game.
Yeah.
Very Inception-like, but once you really have that firm understanding of what it is, it makes perfect sense.
You have a bunch of different metagames with the different formats for Magic.
Yep.
It's like the cards that you're playing in Standard, you're probably not playing those decks that you can play in Standard in the Modern format or the Legacy format. For sure not the Commander format.
Right.
Or Vintage.
Right.
Very different piles of cards at this point.
Right.
And even aside from that, like these, the metagame that is, let's talk about the Modern format. If it's, one of these decks is just the best deck in the format, and now people are starting to figure out, okay, what can beat this one really good deck?
Yes.
And then if that deck turns out to just be extremely good, now that becomes the new targeted deck. Now it's like, all right, now what can take out this one deck?
Right.
You're figuring out what people are playing
Right.
and then going forward.
Right. And I just talked about, I go to my local game store and there are 10 players, 10 Modern players, right? But then I also go to the store on the other side of town.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And there's 10 more players, but they're playing 10 other different decks.
Yep.
Okay. That store has a different metagame than this other store.
Yep.
So it can mean many different things. However, I really do think the term game within the game is probably one of the best descriptors of what the metagame actually is.
Yep. Next up, we have one of my favorite terms in the entire game.
Let's be honest, it's your favorite. It is your favorite.
Ooh, is it? Is it? It's definitely tied for number one.
It is.
If anything.
It is.
It is the term scoop.
Scoop. All right, we're out.
We're out. That's so for scoop, it's you or your opponent pick up all of your cards while you're in the middle of a game. They just pick them all up and they scoop them all up, really. And they're no longer there. They just left the game.
They quit.
They quit on you.
They quit. Another guy, dude. I got another great story.
I was about to say, go ahead.
But when I first got into Magic again, I'm playing. I remember who I was playing against.
Yeah.
I remember the deck they were playing. I remember the deck I was playing. I was doing well. I ended up winning, and he said, "Yeah, all right, I scoop." I look at my cards. I look at him. I'm sorry. You what? What are you doing? I scoop. I'm like, still don't get it. And then when he just starts picking everything up. Okay, I get it now. You quit.
I get it now. He forfeit. He rage
forfeited.
Quit. Yeah, he was done.
Yes.
One of my favorite stories with scooping. Dan over here used to do some Magic content online, and he was was asking the community for what tribal deck should he play next, and I told him mono blue. Counter tribal,
counter spells,
nothing but like counter spells and controlling your opponent. And then he was hitting me up. He's like, "Okay, so what's the win con?"
Yep.
I'm like, "Dan, what do you mean?" They scoop.
Yep.
You make it to where they get so frustrated. They know they're not gonna win. They just scoop everything up. They lose.
Here's another one for you. He just said win con. That's win condition.
Win
There's
condition.
an extra for you.
There's another one for you. We got like 12 in here.
There you
now,
go. There you go. We got a
whatever it
lot.
is.
We got a lot. So, all right. Scoop, definitely one of Jim's favorites.
Yeah.
But that is 10 terms that we think every card game player should know. And again, I think these 10 terms are going to be really good for new players to any of these card games. So, what do you think? Did we miss any? We definitely did.
The thing about this is there are so many out there, and
Yes.
who knows? We could potentially make a series out of
We
it.
could make part 2. Absolutely. But these are the first 10 that maybe aren't necessarily the most important, but they're definitely 10 big ones that we think
10 big
everybody
ones
should
are
know.
favorites.
And then if you've got some of your favorites, leave them in a comment down below. Let us know. And that's all we got for you for today. Thanks everybody for being here. We'll catch you in the next video. See you, everybody.
Take care.